Hello, welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto. Today we're going to talk about the 10 things that have popped up most recently in my video comments from people that I think I need to respond to. Actually, I came up with 11, so it's kind of a grab bag today. But these are things that enough people have commented on to where I feel the need to respond, but none of them are really enough for a whole video. So, for instance, I did an entire video called, Who Owns Your Car? And the short answer is you do. And if your name is in the title, obviously you're the title owner. And if there's a lien holder on it, they might hold a lien, but they're not the owner. And I've had people tell me, they say, well, Steve, you don't own your car, the state does. Why would you think that you own it? I said, well, I've got a title that says, Steve Lehto, owner. I mean, that's the legal document. What do you have? They say, well, if you don't make payments on it, the bank will seize it. And of course, if you leave it illegally parked someplace and the state grabs it and they auction it, that means you don't own your car. Well, number one, those things haven't happened yet. And number two, until they do happen, you own your car. And I've had people say, well, you don't own your house though. And I say, is your name on the mortgage? They say, yeah, but stop paying taxes and see what happens. Okay. If you stop paying taxes, that's a different situation where the state might attempt to hold a tax sale to get you to pay your taxes and so on. But you still own the house until that happens. So as of right now, you own your car, you own your house. The fact that things can happen in the future that haven't happened yet doesn't change the present state of the facts right now. Another thing that pops up too often, considering it's a harebrained sovereign citizen conspiracy theory wacko idea, I hear about once every 2 or 3 days, and it's always in comments under random videos. It has nothing to do with this, where people will say, well, hey, everybody, this Steve Lehto guy, he's an attorney. And since attorneys swear an allegiance to the crown, you can't believe a word he says. And they always throw that in there as if, that's not, if that were true, the shocking part would be attorneys swear an allegiance to the crown? But they always go, as you know, since they swear an allegiance to the crown, blah, blah, as if that's a known fact. And it's absurd, okay? America is not it's not a monarchy. We're a country that doesn't have a king or a queen, therefore we have no crown. And the funny thing is they'll say, oh no, you swore a pledge, you swore an oath to the crown of England. Really? Because the oath that I actually swore an oath to, you can find it online, by the way. Just look it up. I swore to uphold the constitutions, plural, the one of the U.S. and the one of the state of Michigan. Never sworn allegiance to anybody in my oath other than to my future clients. I had somebody, and this I'll admit is a one-off, but it was so strange. I did this story about the woman who committed a crime, and when asked why she had done it, she said, I don't like Mondays. And many people know there's a song by the Boomtown Rats called I Don't Like Mondays. And that song came out long after the crime occurred. And I had told the story about how Bob Geldof, who wrote the song, was in America when the crime took place. And said that he was so moved and befuddled by the idea that this had happened by somebody who said, I don't like Mondays, that's why I did it, that he wrote the song. And he tells the whole story about how he wrote the song. I had somebody who actually said, Steve, you've got the story backwards. He wrote the song before it happened. And when that happened, he was mortified that somebody had done what he wrote the song about. Yeah. And, okay. I had several people, actually quite a few people, and this might be the most prolific of the comments I'm going to talk about today. I had probably 100 or 200 people say that brake checking another vehicle in traffic is legal if they are tailgating you because they're tailgating you. So because they're tailgating you and then you brake check, what you do to them is okay because they're breaking the law. And I am unaware of any situation where the two wrongs make a right happens in a legal setting, and it doesn't actually happen anywhere. The fact that they're breaking the law means that theoretically they could be ticketed for tailgating the same way you could be ticketed for brake checking. Probably be called careless or reckless driving. And of those two, guess which is the more serious offense? Brake checking. So the idea that you are allowed to brake check somebody because they are tailgating you is absurd. I had quite a few people, and this isn't as many as the previous one, but quite a few people have commented to me and say, Steve, you keep talking about court-appointed attorneys. You should probably tell people that court-appointed attorneys work for the prosecutor, and therefore you shouldn't accept one if it's offered to you. And I point out that that's not true. Court-appointed attorneys don't represent the prosecutor. They don't work for the prosecutor. They might work for the court, meaning that the court is who actually, oversees their office. But someone has to. And the point is that the court-appointed attorney you get might be overworked, he might be underpaid, but he represents you once he's appointed to you. But he doesn't answer to the prosecutor. That's absurd. And there's a lot of people out there, most of them are sovereign citizen, tinfoil hat people, who think that there's a huge conspiracy involving everybody in the court. The judge, the bailiff, the clerks, the prosecutors, the attorneys, they all work together. It's not true at all. Absolutely not true. So take the tinfoil hat off, close your eyes, take a few deep breaths, but no, the defense attorneys don't work for the prosecutor, court-appointed or otherwise. I gave a hypothetical situation. I described a hypothetical in a story I did a while back. I was trying to explain the concept of plain view, the plain view doctrine. And if a police officer is legally someplace and he can see with his own eyes something that's in plain view, he often does not have to get a search warrant to take that into account, because a search warrant says you need a warrant for searches and seizures. But the point is that if it's something that's in plain view, you don't need a warrant for it. That's an exception to the rule. So as the example I gave, I said, suppose a police officer's on your front porch legally, and he can look in your window and see a machine gun. I said that might be something that's in plain view that they could then do something about. And I was as vague as possible, because I was trying to just give an example. And I had several people say, Steve, cops not allowed on my porch. And I said, number one, as a hypothetical, I said, suppose he's there legally. But number two, a police officer can walk up to your door, knock on your door, depending on why he's there. He's not breaking any laws. Anybody can walk up to your front door and knock on the door. Now, if you have a sign that says no soliciting, that's one thing, but a police officer is not soliciting anything. Suppose somebody had called the police and said, hey, there's a problem at this house. Cop walks up, knocks on the door, see there's a problem at the house. So he's there legally. But besides it, it's a hypothetical. If I give you a hypothetical, you don't get to change the facts. I have to tell you that when I was in law school, we had professors give us exams, and they give you a fact pattern, and the fact pattern is very specific. And it'll say, assume there's a company that makes widgets, Acme Company. An Acme widget company makes widgets, and blah, 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 blah. And they give you a fact pattern and say, okay, explain this, explain this, explain this. And we had a test, and I hope the gentleman's not watching my videos, but we had a test that described somebody selling something, and it was made out of PVC. And the professor had simply used PVC to indicate it was some kind of plastic. And when everyone got up and was done with the exam, this one guy stayed behind and ran out of time. It's like a 3-hour exam. So at lunch, we're all sitting around talking, and somebody asked him, look, dude, what took you so long? Like, we were all finished like an hour before you. And he goes, well, you guys, how long did you spend explaining the problem with the PVC? And we all said, what problem with what PVC? And he goes, well, the hypothetical in the exam was impossible because PVC doesn't do that. And we're like, what? He goes, yeah. He goes, and it turns out the guy was a chemist. He understood chemistry. He goes, what the professor had put in the exam, and he said that the PVC did something, that was impossible. He goes, I spent a blue book explaining the impossibility of PVC doing what he said. And we said, but in the hypothetical, it happened. And he goes, but it was impossible. And he couldn't wrap his head around the fact that the hypothetical said something happened. In his world, it couldn't have happened. And so he wrote a whole section of the exam basically saying, sorry, professor, what you've described is impossible. The professor's not asking for your dissertation on the properties of PVC in a law school class. I don't know how he did in the exam, but I suspect that entire blue book that he wrote on the properties of PVC didn't actually help him at all with his grade. So when I describe the hypothetical of the guy on your porch legally, and you can see in the window there's a machine gun sitting there, that is perfectly legal because I said it was. And I've had people say, well, but Steve, a machine gun's not per se illegal. Well, it's not per se illegal if you've got a tax stamp for it, but those are fairly uncommon. And let's suppose you were a convicted felon. You might not be allowed to own a gun at all, let alone a machine gun. And I had several people say, Steve, but you can't tell it's a machine gun. In my hypothetical, the guy looked in the window and he said it was a machine gun. It's my hypothetical. I get to make up my own facts. That's what a hypothetical is. So if you wanted to say, hey, Steve, in your hypothetical, just so you know in real life, blah, 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 that's fine. That's fine. But understand that after you typed about 2 or 3 sentences, you're doing what the guy in class did, where you're doing a blue book on PVC and the qualities thereof. Nobody cares. It's irrelevant. I did a video about whether or not the word God, G-O-D, the word God appeared in the Constitution. I got a lot of comments telling me I'm an atheist. I'm going to a dark, hot place when I die. And I had several people tell me I should go there immediately. And I had quite a few people say that I'm actually just a very, very bad person to say that God is not in the Constitution. And I pointed out that you can simply get the full text of the Constitution, cut it and paste it into Word and do a word search, and it'll come up almost instantly and say, not found. The word God, G-O-D, is not in the Constitution. The word microwave is not in the Constitution. I was merely pointing something out. Now, I had people saying, but Steve, underlying you pointing that out is obviously you're poking at people who are believers in God. And no. In fact, when I did the video on things not in the Constitution, I actually did a couple Google searches to see if I missed any. And I noticed that every single list I found pointed out that God is not in there because it's one of the most misunderstood things. So I thought, well, if it's that misunderstood, I should do it. I did it, and I got that reaction. I did a video twice now on books that people haven't read that they love to criticize. The Warren Commission Report and Unsafe at Any Speed. And I simply said, I've read both those books. And I'm happy to discuss them with anybody who's read them. And people will come up to me and say, Steve, but Unsafe at Any Speed was so unfair to the Corvair, blah, 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 blah. I go, have you read it? And they go, no. So why haven't you read it? Well, I shouldn't have to read a bad book. How do you know it's bad? Because I heard that it was. Someone told me it was. Okay, whatever. You can't criticize something you're ignorant of. I mean, you can, but it's a sign of your own ignorance. And so when people tell me that they're critical of the Warren Report, I simply pointed out and I said, well, I've actually read this thing. Here's a hardcover first edition. I've actually read this along with the 26 volumes of exhibits, or whatever it was, 20 some odd volumes of exhibits. And I simply said, if you want to debate the Warren Commission Report, you should read it first. I had several people say, Steve, Oswald did it. What's wrong with you? I never said he didn't. I asked if you read the report. And I actually had one guy go, Steve, what part of Oswald did it don't you understand? That is the dumbest construction of any question. What part of don't you understand? I should probably do a whole video on that. I get that all the time. What part of this don't you understand? What part of that don't you understand? Probably you picked the wrong part, but that's not the point. I didn't say Oswald did it. I didn't say Oswald didn't do it. I simply said, have you read the Warren Report? If you haven't read it, you can't criticize it knowledgeably. You can criticize it the same way that I can criticize Paraguay. Never been there. But it's a bad place. I'm joking. I'm sure it's a beautiful place. But I wouldn't know. I've never been there. I still get comments from people underneath videos who tell me that if you get pulled over by a police officer, he's got to tell you why he pulled you over. And if he doesn't, you can then not cooperate with him because he's not cooperating with you. Even though I did an entire video explaining why the police don't have to tell you why they pulled you over. You don't have the right to know that until you're being arraigned. And at your arraignment, you'll find out if, in fact, there was grounds for you to be pulled over or arrested or searched or what have you. But the court is where it's going to happen, not at the side of the road. And yet I have people go, well, Steve, if the cop won't tell me why he's pulled me over, why should I cooperate with him? Because you have to? I don't know. I've had quite a few people tell me in response to my video that you shouldn't ignore mail. They say, well, Steve, but my mail gets misdelivered or misaddressed or mismoved, or it's, I get my neighbor's mail, they get my mail. So if I get a summons from the court, I can just ignore it and just say, I never got it because you can't prove I got it. Ugh. As I pointed out, I've had people tell me that they had arrest warrants issued for them because they failed to respond to a jury notice. And people say, but Steve, if that happens, I would just go into court and say, I never got it. And I say, yeah, that's my point exactly. You would have to go into court and say that. But you wouldn't actually get the opportunity to say that until you've been arrested. So you're driving along one day and you get pulled over. Police officer goes, do you know why I pulled you over? And you say, no, why? And he goes, I got a bench warrant for your arrest. Get out of the car. Now, see, that's an occasion where he'll probably tell you why he's arresting you because it'll be such a surprise to you. But you'll then get put in the back of the car. Your car will get towed. And they'll take you to the police station, process you. And you better hope that the court is open that day. Because if it's a Saturday, you may have to wait till Monday to find out why you've been arrested or to find out what you can do to get yourself out of this mess. Okay? So the idea that you can ignore mail because some mail is misaddressed, I have news for you. Many courts, many court rules, and many laws presume that something is properly addressed and mailed properly got to its recipient. Whether you got it or not, there's a presumption that you did get it. So I know people who've said, Steve, in my state, I know for a fact that they will not arrest you for failure to respond to a mailed notice because blah, 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 blah. If that's true and you know it for a fact, great. I'm just letting you know that you're living dangerously. If you actually get the notice that says you need to report for jury duty, if you throw that away and ignore it, you're living dangerously because you were warned by somebody that you should probably respond to those. And then finally, I've got to tell you that for some odd reason, I mentioned that VINs, vehicle identification numbers, are not actually true numbers in that they contain letters. It's a 17-digit string on a modern car, and there's some letters and some numbers. And I've had quite a few people say, but Steve, it's actually hexadecimal numbers. Those letters represent numbers. Not all of them. The VIN to my Ford Explorer has an F in it. I believe it's a second character. And the F stands for Ford. That's not a number. That's a letter. Okay? You can say that the F could stand for a number, but it doesn't in that setting. And I've responded to a few people who said this and said, no, F is a manufacturer code. They go, yeah, but it could be a number. But it's not. And I'll tell you right now, the first person who can actually prove to me in a way that is objectively provable that F in that setting is a number and not the initial for Ford, I'll pay you F dollars for doing that, okay? So it's obviously a letter, it's not a number. But again, I know people who, once they go out on a limb and say something like that and they realize how stupid it is, they'd rather stand out on the limb than admit it and come back in and just say, hey, something turns out I was wrong. It's mostly a number. It's a bunch of numbers, but it does contain a letter. That's number 11 on my list of 10. Questions or comments? Put them below. Otherwise, talk to you later. Bye-bye.